Hey everyone, and welcome to your favorite YouTube series. It's our favorite YouTube series as well. I mean, you know it is. You got to just admit it, right? And I have with me today the one and only Mr. Aaron Bragg has joined me. We are part of the really bad security crew. We're missing Anthony today. I think he's at the dentist, so he's having way less fun than we are. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Matt, I'd love to sit and listen to this podcast and I'd love to have a good security conversation, but I'm dealing with things, so many things. These things are everywhere. I have literally an internet of things, to which I say, hold on. This conversation is actually geared perfectly for you, as I'm happy to introduce Mark Elliott. He's a director of solutions engineering at Asimily, and we're going to be talking about the Internet of Things and all of those things that all of us are dealing with. With that, Mark, I'll pass it over to you. The one question that we always start with is, in an era where folks have a lot of meetings on their schedule, there's a lot of vendors always asking for people's time. Why, I guess, introduce yourself and then tell the audience why they should spend a half an hour with Asimily.
Sure. So thank you for having me on. To start off with, in this sort of environment, which is life-changing, almost every month we find a new threat, a new aspect out there. I've been in this space for 10 years, by the way, for medical IoT security solutions over several vendors. The most common thing was everyone didn't know what they had. So there was inventory management. And then it was, oh, we have to do vulnerability management now that we know the inventory. The problem is that on average, between 1.5 to 5 million CVE hits can be found in any hospital today. That number is just astronomical. Me telling you your inventory and telling you that you have 1.5 million CVE hits, and then saying, oh, 100,000 of those have a severity of critical, 10. I need to concentrate on those. They're not wrong. Please, don't get me wrong. Definitely we should look at those 10, but there needs to be more streamlining, more prioritization and optimization for them to deal with that. So basically what happens is that you need to take all those theoreticals, then use a tool like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which identifies what is the common attack vector for a vulnerability. If, let's say, it's remote desktop protocol, is the device running RDP? If it is not susceptible to that attack. So what you do is now you reduce the theoretical down to the actual. And then once you have those, you use tools like not just the CVSS or the EPSS, which are security risk measurement systems. EPSS being the latest, involve things like temporal and environmental aspects of the devices, but also like the MITRE risk rubric for medical devices, because medical devices offer risks that are much different, as we're seeing today in all of the threats and challenges. And then also something like the actual MDS2, which is the manufacturer's disclosure statement for medical device security. Say that a couple times fast.
Yeah, we do know why there's acronyms.
Right, and that's why it's MDS2, right? So anyways, in that MDS2 is a wealth of information. Most products out there will take it and put it in a library for you to read at your convenience. No security professional in the world has convenience, right? We're all under the gun. And during a crisis, you don't want to have to read a 30-page article. We are the single solution out there that actually takes all that information in the MDS2, digitize it, put it into our database, but then put it into our algorithms. So for example, in the MDS2s, there is the hardening guide. These are vendor and FDA approved remediation steps. So instead of just giving you, which most people do, microsegment and do a patch upgrade, there's all of these specific remediation steps that are recommended and approved, because you can't do anything to a medical device that is not approved by the vendor and the FDA. And now you have the ability to actually have all that hard work done for you. Again, prioritizing and optimizing those solutions. The fact that we create a sandbox, a virtual reality playground, to play with those remediation steps to see what the least amount of work is required to secure that device. And then on top of that, we do anomalies and malicious behaviors and all the ransomware aspects. So I'll give you a real world example.
Before we do the real world example, let's back up a little bit,
Sure.
because obviously
That was a
you're
lot. I'm
you're
sorry.
speaking my language here.
I was going to say, if only we had someone in the healthcare industry.
If only we had someone in healthcare that was merging two big systems.
Yep.
So you talked about the remediation stuff. Let's back that a little bit. So how would we do discovery, right? You're on a journey, you're doing healthcare acquisition. The very first thing that you have to do is that discovery part, right? So I know I know what I have in my environment, but now we're going to do an acquisition, right? There's all types of work that has to go into inventory. What would be just your very first step, even before we get into like the data sharing or mediation and stuff like that?
Sure. So all of these solutions in this space are passive, right? Because most medical devices can, by recommendation of NIST, should not be scanned by an SNMP scan, WMI, whatever your powerful tool is.
Because they knock PAC systems over. Been there, done that.
We actually had a new client that shut off all of their patient monitors in the ICU at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. All of the screens went.
Okay, never mind. Sorry.
So, anyways, and the reason was they did a scan. Someone who was new to the scan team, the vulnerability scanner, included that subnet range, not even thinking, oh, what devices are on that? Right? It was pretty blatant. All our alarms were going off on our side saying, hey, it looks like someone's doing this harmful scan that could be malicious. Well, it wasn't. It was self-inflicted. It wasn't malicious. But in any event,
those darn interns.
We listen to all the traffic passively. That means we can't have any agents. We can't do any scans. So that means it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for us to listen to enough traffic. And this is true for all the solutions out there. To listen for 2 to 3 weeks so that we hear all those devices using their specific operational traffic. Once I see DICOM, once I see HL7, once I see a GE specific protocol, I know exactly what type of device that is and who it's talking to, and all of those characteristics that within the AI and a deep packet inspection model with several hundred protocol parsers allows me to identify that device specifically, make, model, firmware, the entire thing. And then I have the ability to then look at all the vulnerabilities that have been published against it to see what the actual vulnerabilities are to that device and what the threat. To your point, though, we have 2 POCs going right now where we already won the POC, but we can't win the PO until we go to one of their acquisition and merger sites and show how we can do an assessment on the site before they bring it into the corporate network. So exactly what
is that. So that kind of ties into the library stuff that you were talking about, right? One of the advantage, it seems like a nice advantage that you have, or to your point, something similar to different products, is you've built that catalog, right? That device catalog based on either historical knowledge from like you said, you had access to hardware manuals and stuff like that. So it sounds like you've built a robust data or device library. Is this one of those things where while you're doing the discovery, do you have the ability to push information to your CMDB, right? So something
sure.
like a ServiceNow to add additional information, right? Because those things are important, especially with passive scanning, right? That help key us up to where, okay, wow, we're seeing this type of traffic at this location. Because a lot of times facilities has moved equipment, right? Like this is a real world scenario, right? They may have moved equipment or upgraded the system and it hasn't made it back up the pipeline into the CMDB and everything else. So where you have an intern, right, that goes and says, okay, hey, the subnet range, this is on our off limits, which is a real thing, right? We're gonna do the weekly check here, not realizing facilities has moved new equipment to that office location and it hasn't made it up the pipeline. So you're saying what is nice, so a bonus for your product, you have the ability to push that information back up. So then the vulnerability management team could then pick that information up and add that IP range, add that subnet to your do not scan list.
Exactly. And any product in this field has to live and die by its integrations. I mean, we have to be bi-directional, share information. It's called a mapping exercise with CMMS and CMDB. Which one of us is the voice of truth, right? So I'm saying IP addresses change dynamically. I should be the voice of truth for IP. The serial number I may or may not see in the passive traffic, but the CMMS or the CMDB will have it in the record. So that'll be their voice of truth. So we match it all up. And usually the MAC address is the Rosetta Stone, right? That's what we're all making sure we're talking about the same device, because everything else can be fluid or not be accurate in the CMMS system.
Well, you had talked a little bit about AI. So I gave you the softball question. Now I'm going to give you a curveball question. So this one's going to be a little bit harder. You talk about, AI and ML. Are you doing relationship behavior analysis? Because obviously MAC address, yes, that's a little bit more of a regular, driver's license, but like driver's license, those can be spoofed also.
Right.
Does your system have the ability to do behavioral analytics tied in with that traditional stuff to then, hey, maybe this behavior on this device is a little bit different. Then you call up your site support team or anything else. Do me a favor, get some eyes on it. I just want to confirm before we do any patching or anything else. Is
Sure.
that what you're talking about when you're saying kind of like that learning behavior?
Well, yeah, and actually there's a low level and high level. On a low level, of course, we use AI with the deep packet inspection, which keeps it honest, right? We're looking at all the utilization operational protocols. So we know specifically what this device should or should not be doing. An Alaris infusion pump should only be talking to an Alaris infusion pump server. It should never talk to anything else except for DHCP. But once you get beyond that, we have a feature called Snapshot. What this allows me to do for every unique device, not a fleet of devices, but for every unique device, because they may be different across the campuses, how they work, we can do a snapshot. What this does is capture the exact behavior of a specific device, what protocols, who it talks to, what time of day it talks, how much traffic it sends. All that information gets snapshotted into basically a benchmark. Once that device does something outside of that, we now report it. Now, it could be something as mundane as they've done a firmware upgrade and the behavior has changed, in which case we would just redo a snapshot. But more than likely, it's probably the malicious event of reconnaissance, the initial kill chain process, where they're starting to try and spread their footprint across your organization, right? And that's why they go dormant for 2 months. Once they're in, they're slowly navigating your network and finding it. Well, if I see a device that's now talking to its neighbors, like an infusion pump talking to an infusion pump, which should never happen, or it starts to use protocols it never used or scans, now I know that device is acting outside of the normal. And what's important is if you look at like Change Health from this last February, they were on their system for 9 days and they didn't detect it. In 9 days, they owned their infrastructure and they'd already exfiltrated all of the data they needed to do. So timing is important. So when you get that alert, this device is behaving incorrectly, you should be able to, one click of a mouse, either tell the NAC, firewall, or whatever is monitoring your network control to either quarantine that device, or if it's a critical device, actually create the zero trust set or ACL policy that said this device can only do this, or this device can't do any of these. So now if it's a critical device, let's say an MRI, CAT scan of an expensive tool, I don't have to shut it down and quarantine it. I can just quarantine the bad behavior till I can schedule to re-image or to resolve whatever the mitigation is. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, the reason being is other real world examples and a little bit of disclaimer. The IV pump hacking always frustrates me because that's a big FUD tactic. I'm not saying you, just others talk about it.
That missing infusion.
We know what can be hacked and what can't. And to your point, right? Like the IV pumps, we have other things in place, right? Where I have a bigger issue. By the time the bad guy gets to the IV pump to hack it, I have bigger, much, much bigger issues. Because your point, like those IV pumps talk to library servers to
Right.
get, the level of medicine that need to do. So that's one where I just had to vent a little bit.
Well,
No,
yeah.
but a more likelihood scenario would be like for if you're using that device scanning, right, and you come across cameras and you may be looking for sensitive camera stuff like our NICU or other things, and then you may stumble across like our flight centers, right? The Aeromed choppers, stuff like that. All those have security cameras because you don't want somebody breaking in it, right? So, but there's a good scenario where you having a robust library. I'm going to put different alerting around the cameras that are looking at the helicopters as opposed to the cameras, that are in the ICU and stuff like that. So that having those different capabilities and allowing for different alerts is definitely obviously something very valuable.
Exactly. And but going back to that behavior, let's use the famous Sony break-in. Someone converted an outdoor camera to be an access point. All right. And because, by the way, the password on the chipset was admin, just
Of course.
right. And they converted it to an access point, and no one noticed that terabytes of data were flowing not from the camera to the DVR, but from the camera outbound. Right. Right. They should have noticed when the first packet went outbound that there was some odd behavior there, but they didn't because no one was looking at that device. IoT devices within a medical infrastructure is their lowest. And yes, infusion pumps, the biggest threat I've seen on infusion pumps is configure, L2 malware, right?
Yes, config. Yes.
Yeah, right. But that's,
That is much more likely than a hacker hacking the infusion pump.
Exactly. It's a nuisance, right? It's a nuisance attack. But when you look at, some of the major breaches, and you'll hear all the anecdotal stories, heaters for fish tanks and power supplies for other things. They are the lowest hanging fruit. They have no protection. No one is looking at them rather than maybe isolating them, right? But I think it was 42% of the known malware incursions were based by dirty USB sticks. In our old days, for us old guys, that was the equivalent of a floppy drive, right? But someone walking around with the latest firmware on a USB stick is probably the most lethal threat to your organization just because how nasty it is. Right? The Mears shipping break 10 years ago now is a prime example. Shut down a global organization because they offered pretty women in fur bikinis and boots to give away these things in front of someone, and then they stuck it in their computer and away it went. So yes, you need to be able to secure, but you need to be able to rectify. So let's go to an ISAC release that came out this last year about Zebra printers. Chinese-owned corporation. These Zebra printers are supposed to, under their SLA, only communicate in the United States. It turns out they're all going to China. And Zebra says, hey, our mirror site's full. We're just bouncing them to China because the mirror site is full. So you could believe them. Or if you have a product like Asimily, we would alert that this device is now reaching out to China. And here's a big differentiator. You ready? Here we're going to cross a line into a whole nother vertical. I will do an instantaneous packet capture. We can do distributed sniffer, which allows us to do a PCAP. We can maintain HIPAA by streaming it over SFTP to a local server. So now, anytime a device does an anomalous behavior of any sort, malicious, or you just don't understand why it's happening, you can automatically capture it to an SFTP server where you can run forensic analysis, Wireshark, or whatever your tool of choice is. So not only have I detected that weird behavior, alerted on it to your SIM, your SOC, to your teams via email, through the portal, but now I've gone ahead and captured that for forensic analysis. One of the hospitals I work with almost daily has had, I think they did 685 scans last year, captures, PCAPs. Because not that they were imminently under a threat, they just didn't understand what was going on in their network. There were devices doing things they didn't understand. And the question is that something I don't understand about the device? Was that a firmware upgrade that changed its behavior? Or is it something more malicious? Now you have a product that found your inventory, took all the vulnerabilities published, ran the MITRE attack and an exploit analysis tool to reduce it down to usually about 5% of the population in medical devices that actually have one or more exploitable vulnerabilities, give you all the remediation steps that are coming from the vendor, from the MDS2s, more than just patch management and microsegmentation, give you a virtual reality sandbox where you can see what is the optimal amount of steps, the fewest steps, the least work that I have to do to secure that device, and then monitor for anomalies, and if we detect them, to capture them for forensic analysis. So you're really capturing all that information in one product.
Well, that's good, because that would help with situations to where a lot of times with medical devices, it's cost versus impact, right? So you could have a situation to where you have an older MRI machine that, costs $250,000, right? It is still working, but it may have X, Y, and Z vulnerabilities after you found out. But there's the cost to that, right? Like, this thing's still working. It could still work for another 5 years. Like, this could help you distinguish what other compensating controls you do, because not all medical devices are going to get patched.
Oh, exactly.
Right. For a variety of reasons. But with this discovery part that you're talking about with your tool, I would say that's just as valuable of, if we can't do remediation, what are the compensating controls that we can do to then protect that our MRI machine, or other things, or sometimes change business processes, right, to give those medical devices protection.
Right. And most solutions out there today will tell you you're in trouble. In fact, they'll tell you you're really in trouble. Right. So they say, well, Mark, you've walked into a minefield. You have all these mines surrounding you. Good luck. And that's it. They've done their job. They've alerted you. We spent almost 3 years developing the product to walk you out of that minefield, to give you the optimal steps that are vendor and FDA approved to do other than microsegmentation. Microsegmentation is never a bad idea, reduces surface attack area, but no one has a network.
There's cost to that.
There cost, manpower. I mean, you confusion of your network team, right? So what if I could do more than that? What if I say, okay, I'll give you an example. To your point, I would prefer a Windows 7 imaging device to a Windows 10. The amount of protocols and ports I have to protect it from is much less than I would a Windows 10 device, right? Because now they're using a lot more ports and protocols and stuff. Matter of fact, the two greatest threats to a Windows 7 imaging system is IPv6, multicast broadcast. The device doesn't know how to deal with multicast broadcasts. It was invented after it was around. And the second thing is DHCP. Technically, they're still susceptible to denial of service attacks over DHCP. But most of those are wireless. So removing DHCP is not an option. This is that one case where you could say microsegmentation is the way to go, because I remove all that broadcast traffic. They won't see the IPv6. If they get DHCP, which they probably will have to because it's wireless, at least I'm going to limit them to the devices on the actual VLAN SSID for that wireless traffic. So let's just create an imaging SSID. We'll put all of those devices on it. And that simple task will remove 90% of the threats to that Windows 7 MRI. Now I have the ability to run this device until it no longer has operational functionality, or I've budgeted enough time to have replacement with a break fix policy. But so much you can, and also by having all that operational utilization information, I can do lifecycle management. For those Windows 7 devices that I might be just churning and burning, waiting for them to break so I can replace with something I have on the shelf, I can actually see how much they're being utilized, prioritize preventative maintenance, and even see the windows of time for each individual device of when they're available. What is their
speaking to the business, that business value. The other thing that you bring up with that, and I know, Matt, I know we're running up against it, but just a couple more quick points, is once you get with the larger systems, a larger system, meaning like from a device level, I think a lot of people don't realize from the business side is you can get big enough to where you can even internal DDoS, right? You get a bad guy that's limited to what he can do because we've locked down certain systems so much can't get access to it. But if you have literally 10,000 printers, 20,000 printers, other things, I don't think companies realize you can actually cause a DDoS to yourself.
Well, to your example, we all know how chatty printers are. They're constantly advertising. If I put 5,000 printers on a single VLAN, I've created my own denial of service attack, right? I mean, let's to your example, that is exactly it. And that's why a product like ours, where you can actually see all the VLANs and all the types of devices that are in those VLANs, allows you to, if you are doing a microsegmentation plan, not only see the effects, but also be able to measure your success as you try to go through microsegmentation to see if you still are, oh, that's only medical devices. Well, there's actually 30 printers on that VLAN. Obviously, someone forgot, and it happens.
Don't get me started on zebra printers.
Oh, please. And we know now that they're a potential threat, so it's even worse, right? I mean, when you look at it from a security aspect.
So we've talked a lot about like healthcare and healthcare devices. I guess I'll throw this question out to both of you. Like, is there a difference between, other than it could be, life or death? I guess that's always a big difference. But, are there differences in the things, right? The devices that are out there from a healthcare perspective versus a manufacturing perspective. And I guess, does Asimily play in other spaces outside of healthcare as well?
Well, yes. And when we look at a hospital with 5,000 medical devices, it will have 30,000 IoT devices.
Yep.
That as a rule, nobody's looking at, right? That's why that concept of that snapshot, understanding the exact behavior and measuring it as we watch the network's traffic and saying, okay, that's what that device does. That's what that device does. Now you take away that opportunity to, exploit a camera, which are on the outside. Let's be honest, access to a device is critical if you're going to exploit it, right? In that initial reconnaissance phase. So now you have the ability to be monitoring all your cameras. And the minute they do something different, hey, look at this guy. Hey, well, you don't know what it is? Let's packet capture its behavior and have some whiz-bang kid who can run Wireshark, God bless them, and it's not a lot of them, have him look at it and figure out what's going on. Right?
Yeah. Yep. Good stuff. Aaron, I learned something today. I learned that much like thing 1 and thing 2, these things will not harm you. They want to have fun. But you got to have some controls around them or they might run around and ruin your house, right? So great conversation. This one flew by. It was a good conversations. Always the half an hour just disappears on us. So Mark, thank you for being a part of this. For those of you that would like to talk more to Asimily, you certainly can reach out. We'll have some stuff in the description. Like, comment, share, all that fun YouTube stuff. They will also be at CloudCon coming up on
I was
July
just going to
22nd
ask that. Are they
and
going to have a table at
23rd.
CloudCon?
Yes, Asimily will be there. And so you can meet the team, have some further conversations with them there. Please thank them for being sponsors along with all of the rest of them. Yes, so Mark, again, thank you for being a part of this. I hope you had as much fun as we did. We love this show. And we will see everyone for episode 44 coming up. All right, thanks everybody.